the news. Brought to you by the ABC Television News Department. Now, here is John Daly.
New communist tactics and another tense border. Communist border guards at the East German border and Soviet offices at that today turned back one British train and delayed an American train en route from West Germany to Berlin, which is, as you know, an island of freedom in the communist half of Germany. The Russians said that the passengers' documents were not in order. Previous Soviet efforts to block traffic into Berlin started in similar fashion. In the Middle East, Russia appears close to winning her long-sought foothold in Syria. The 60,000-man Syrian army is now under full control of pro-Soviet officers equipped with Soviet weapons and aided by 300 Russian advisors. Today, neighboring Iraq nervously asked the United States for defensive weapons, and Turkey blasted Syria for a troop buildup on the borders of tiny Lebanon. Turkey also blames Egypt for stirring up Arab nations with communist help. In the focal area of Mideast tension, tonight, Jewish residents in the Suez Canal zone are reported fleeing Egypt before the British and French troops leave. But Egyptians are holding some Jewish hostages, individuals seized before the British and the French landed at the canal. At the United Nations, Russia demanded that Britain, France, and Israel pay for clearing the Suez Canal and pay the full cost of the United Nations Emergency Police Force. Tonight, the General Assembly overrode that Soviet demand, voted instead $10 million to pay the initial costs of the UN police force. Cost of clearing the canal and who is to pay will be determined later on. Against these developments, there came a call in the United Nations for Britain and America to close ranks. Delegates heard Australia's Foreign Minister Richard Casey's effort to restore Allied unity.
British-American relations don't affect only Britain and the United States. They're of vital importance to every non-communist country in the world, which means 90% of the countries represented here. If United Kingdom, United States relations are less than 100% good, practically every one of you, practically every one of us, is adversely affected and the peace and stability of the world is menaced. We all realize this. Many of us have been diverted from a realization of it by the events of recent times. But when we review these events in more quiet perspective, I'm convinced that we'll realize more truly where the truth lies. We in Australia, Mr. President, we in Australia say to our mother country, Great Britain, and we say to our great friends in the United States, put first things first and get together in confident relations of mutual trust for the good of the whole democratic world.
An anomaly of the present world crisis is that heavy bloodshed has come in the Soviet rape of Hungary, but the focus continues to be on the Suez, where loss of life was much less, in fact, relatively was light. Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld did demand again today that Hungary allow UN observers into that country. Two previous messages, you know, were ignored. In Budapest, the Workers' Council is again persuading reluctant workers to get back on the job for the present. At the same time, demanding that the puppet government return former Premier Imre Nagy and begin negotiation for the withdrawal of Soviet troops from Hungary. Neither the persuasion nor the demands are getting much response. Hungarians, meanwhile, continue to flee their country.
It's safer to come by night now. The Russians have tightened their vigil across the border of Austria and freedom. The Russians wrecked the bridge across the Einser Canal, but escapees improvised one of their own. Crossing it is mighty treacherous. But on the other side lies freedom and the helping hand. Safety at last after days of fighting and nights of flight. Hungarian soldiers are aiding their countrymen to escape. The danger lies with the Soviet patrols. How many are being caught, we'll never know. But more than 82,000 have made it. The people of Austria are hard-pressed to feed and house those who steal across by night and who rush across by day.
Some Hungarian refugees who managed to reach our shores today found the meaning of democracy in its true essence. They met the president. ABC's John Secondary has the picture story in Washington.
It was a mixed scene, this meeting between the President of the United States and 12 Hungarian refugees. They were impressed by it. For a time, it even drove the memory of what had happened to them from their minds. It is something that could not happen anywhere else, they said. But President Eisenhower was more concerned that should be made to feel at home. He said he hoped that they had received only kindness and courtesy, that those were the feelings of all Americans for them, and he spoke of the suffering of the Hungarian people, which have served to bind that country closer to our own. And on to Augusta, Georgia, for a time unknown. A week, perhaps 10 days. President Eisenhower is accompanied by Mrs. Eisenhower and Mrs. Dowd. Contact with Washington will be constant, but the president hopes to relax a bit. Now back to John Daly in New York.
The nation's economy, rising costs, and predictions of plenty. A closer look at this phase of the news in just a minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, Academy Award winner, Mr. Ernest Borgnine.
There's another picture I'm really happy about. It wasn't made at any motion picture studio. My chest x-ray. It shows that I don't have tuberculosis. It's a good idea to get one of these every year because tuberculosis is something you don't feel sick with at first. My doctor tells me that every 5 minutes, somebody comes down with TB, that it takes a chest x-ray to tell a doctor whether you have TB or not. And I like to be sure. Christmas seals are helping to make chest x-rays possible for all of us. And medical research, rehabilitation, and health education. That's why each year we buy Christmas seals. Mrs. Borgnine and I use them on all our Christmas cards and packages. I hope you'll buy and use Christmas seals too.
Economic news from Washington. The government disclosed today that the October cost of living index jumped 0.5% for a new record high. Labor Statistics Commissioner Ewan Clegg said living costs are still heading upward, but he discounts fears of inflation. Clegg indicates that it's all part of a firmly expanding economy. Another optimistic view comes from economist Robert Nathan, who served the New Deal. He sees no major declines ahead. In fact, Mr. Nathan predicts a $15 to $20 billion a year increase in the national output of goods and services. One segment of the nation's economy, shipping, estimates a loss of $180 million in the longshoremen strike that lasted 9 days before the government stepped in. Longshoremen are back at work now. Both sides have notified the Federal Mediation Service that they're ready to resume contract talks, but so far, no new meeting has been set. The French liner Liberté today moved into a port of New York, once again busy with hustling dock wallopers. Some 60,000 members of the Independent International Longshoremen's Association were back at work here and in other East and Gulf Coast ports. The work is resumed under a 10-day Taft-Hartley injunction, and hearings scheduled for later this week will consider extending the cooling-off period for another 70 days. But even as the backlog of work is cleared up, ILA President Captain William Bradley sounds a warning. He says that if negotiations continue as they've been going, he doubts the contract dispute can be settled within 80 days. Guided missiles and the B-52. Defense Secretary Wilson today ended the Pentagon guided missile dispute by giving the Air Force control of all missiles with a range of more than 200 miles. Mr. Wilson's ruling, a blow to the Army, gives the Air Force control of the IRBM, the Intermediate Range Ballistic Missile, the Jupiter, which is now being built by the Army. But in return, the Army gets control of all anti-aircraft missiles with less than a 100-mile range, including the Air Force Navy-developed Telos. From the Air Force today, first film of an historic non-stop flight to the North Pole and back.
At Loring Air Force Base in Maine, the B-52 pilots are briefed on their mission to show the world in time of crisis the power of the Air Force. Destination, the North Pole, hitting a mythical target en route, then fly back non-stop to Strategic Air Command bases in the United States. 6 of the giant bombers fly out of Loring, 4 other planes out of a West Coast base. Somewhere in the hours to come in the cold stratosphere, rendezvous Once, twice, 3 times with tankers to gain the vital fuel for long-range striking power. In formation, the B-52s roar over their field, then veer to the north toward their mythical target. The families wait out the long hours. It's the longest non-stop flight in jet history. Then the awaited sight. Mission successful. The 140-ton B-52 sweep down to their field. They've flown non-stop up to 17,000 miles, up to 32 hours in the air, and prove that the Air Force can deliver nuclear bombs anywhere. The end of an historic mission and a warm greeting from the loved ones who counted out the hours.
One of America's most famous band leaders was found dead late today in his Connecticut home. Tommy Dorsey, an institution in the ranks of popular music, was found dead in Greenwich, Connecticut by his agent. Mr. Dorsey was 52 years old. He had choked to death accidentally on food particles while he slept. Rounding out the news, a federal grand jury in Washington has indicted 4 New York City newspapermen, librarian Mary Knowles of Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, and a former television program director for contempt of Congress. All 6 refused to answer questions about alleged communist backgrounds before the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee. Excise taxes. The House of Representatives Subcommittee in Washington heard testimony from a Treasury official today that the administration will probably ask for another year's extension of present excise taxes imposed as an emergency measure during World War II. In just a moment, people, places, and things.
Have you ever been in a forest fire? Have you ever fought a raging forest fire? Have you ever seen, close up, the terrible damage a forest fire does to trees, to wildlife, to outdoor sport, to forage for livestock, to the source of the precious water we use? Last year, forest fires destroyed national wealth and weakened our national strength. They seriously endangered many communities and vital communication. So let's keep in mind what Smokey said.
Please be careful. Remember, only you can prevent forest fires.
People, places, and things, an automobile landmark. The Ford Motor Company today unveiled a new type convertible car. The steel hardtop roof is controlled by a dashboard button which opens the trunk lid so that it rises up and out of the way, allowing room for the roof to drop in. Then, locks are automatically released in the top itself, which slowly swings up, back, and down into the trunk. The entire operation takes about 40 seconds, and at the end of the cycle, the trunk automatically closes and locks itself. 40 seconds from hardtop sedan to open-air convertible. If it starts to rain, the button on the dashboard is reversed, the roof closes itself. The new model goes into production in January. No price has been set on the car as yet. Australia. A British newsman reports that romance has hurdled the high wire fence separating men's and women's quarters at the Olympic Village. Reporter Maurice Smith says he has seen smooching records broken each day, despite the fact that some of the girls are choosy. On their side of the fence in Olympic Village, Smith found this sign: wanted urgently. Pole vaulter, apply within. That's it. Good night and a good tomorrow.
Tune in again tomorrow at this time for John Daly and the news.
Stay tuned for Bold Journey on ABC Television Network.